On the 12th of June 2014, a soaked and slightly torn backpack is found stuck among boulders and driftwood near the shore of the Panamanian Chanquinola River in the desolate Talamanca area on the Atlantic slopes of the Continental Divide. Inside the backpack, 2 bras and 2 sunglasses are found, together with 2 mobile phones, a camera, a water bottle, some cash money, and an insurance card. In the following weeks, more items are found upstream along the shores of the same river, including 2 left hiking boots, opened and slightly torn shorts, and a few human remains. It is soon discovered that all of these items belong to Kremers and Lisanne Froon, 2 young Dutch women who were reported missing 10 weeks earlier at the town of Boquete in the Sharik district on the Pacific slopes of the Continental Divide. An earlier search for the 2 missing women had failed to find any trace of them, and the official investigation concluded that Kris and Lisanne must have suffered some fatal accident somewhere in the extremely rough and desolate terrain of the Talamanca region. But what exactly happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, and why and where they left the trail, was never determined. The answer to what happened to Kris and Lisanne may be hidden among a strange series of 100 flashlight pictures which were found on the camera of Lisanne. Created well past midnight, 1 week after the disappearance of the 2 women, these images have since become known as the night pictures, and the unknown location where they were made is usually referred to as the night location. If we wish to find out what happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, we will have to find out where and why they made these pictures. But in order to find the night location, we will first need to know what the place looks like. So instead of spectacular new theories or expedition footage, we go back in time with this episode for an overview of all the work that has been done to unravel the mystery of the night pictures. To start with, it should be noted that only a few of these 100 pictures were initially released to the public, and until this day, almost half of the pictures remain hidden away in some archive, where they have been seen by only a few people. A few of these pictures, such as image 550, which shows twigs and red plastic lying on what appears to be a large boulder, and image 580, which seems to show the back of Kris's head, have been the subject of endless speculation on the various forums.
What about the photos from the camera? There were 90+ photos taken of just random things.
Yes, I've shown them. They're creepy. They're Blair Witch Project.
Was this particular picture taken accidentally while moving the camera about, or did it serve some special purpose? Sadly, it seems likely we will never know for certain, but a detailed study of all other images gives us at least a clue of what may have happened. Another image which caught the attention was image 576, which shows an assembly of paper draped on top of a boulder, together with a small mirror and the strap of either the backpack or the camera bag. Close inspection shows the 2 young women constructed the daylight signalling mirror from the bottom of an empty Pringles can, while the carton sides of the box, together with the torn remains of their tourist brochure spelling out the letters SOS on top of the boulder. The discovery that the mirror was made from the bottom of a Pringles can would later prove to be of huge importance, as it would give us an object with known dimensions, making it possible to calibrate all distance measurements. Image 542, which shows some large boulder or rock wall, was also the subject of lengthy speculation, with some seeing this as an overhanging rock wall above the head of the two women, while others speculated the camera was looking down at the edge of a cliff. A close inspection, though, shows we are seeing the underside of the various leaves, proving beyond doubt that the camera is looking upward, with the top of the rock wall well above the level of the camera. At the same time, though, we can see some loose leaves and sand lying on top of the stone, proving that the rock wall is not overhanging but bending away from the camera. This disproves the original idea that the two young women were in some kind of cave, but it took several years before we finally got a better perception of what the night location looked like. It wasn't until 2019 that a first attempt was made to fit all night pictures together in one single mosaic, and in June 2020, Reddit user Needed Monster was the first to publish a complete panorama of the night location assembled from the pictures. You can find a link to this panorama in the description of this video. Showing a landscape littered with large boulders, as well as what appears to be a distant shoreline and steep slopes, the panorama offered a first view of the place where Kris and Lisanne spend the night of April 7, 2014, almost a full week after their disappearance. Despite its tremendous importance, though, the panorama was not perfect. Although all pictures seem to fit together nicely, as long as you concentrate on distant objects like the forked tree, there is a noticeable parallax visible as soon as you take nearby objects into account, which shows the camera must have moved slightly between the various images. That the camera is indeed moving about becomes instantly clear when we stitch the images of the first series sequentially together. When the stone blocks most of the camera light in image 542, Lisanne lifts the camera high up in the air in the next image, with the camera swaying back and forth in her raised arm. In image 547, Lisanne takes over the camera from her left hand into her right hand, before finally lowering down the camera on her right side, taking image 550 during this downward motion. These camera movements make it impossible to stitch the images of this series together without introducing a clear amount of motion blur. However, the camera movements turned out to be a blessing in disguise, for we can use the parallax created by the camera movements in a technique called Photogrammetry, which allows the creation of a three-dimensional model of a scene. In simple terms, an object which is close to a moving camera will show a very large parallax between two pictures. We basically see it whizzing past, while a distant object barely seems to move between two images. So the amount of parallax tells us the relative distance to an object, independent on how fast or slow the camera is moving. Nowadays, there is lots of software which uses photogrammetry to instantly convert almost any moving video into a three-dimensional scene, and we extensively use this while analysing drone and expedition footage. However, sadly, the quality of the existing night pictures is far too low to get consistent results via this method. So in the end, there was no other option but to track all objects manually, carefully measuring the amount of parallax for each object between any two images, and converting this into relative distances and bearings. For highest accuracy, we checked more than 500 objects, which could be consistently identified in subsequent images, ranging from leaves, branches, pebbles, scratches in boulders, and many different types of plants. For each object, a number of variables was recorded for each image it appeared in, such as location, size, orientation, and relative brightness. We then wrote our own software to convert all these variables into the spatial coordinates of each object using photogrammetry. This work took more than 2 full years of painstaking measurements, endless calculations, overloaded computers, and frequent despair. But in the end, we managed to reach our goal by obtaining accurate bearings and distances for all objects visible in the night pictures. Once you know distances, bearings, and sizes from all objects, you can place them in their correct relative positions and build the landscape around them, which resulted in the first 3D model of the night location. Almost just as importantly, the calculations gave us accurate camera positions and pointing angles for each of the night pictures, so we know where the camera was located in the scene for each picture and in which direction it was pointing. With this data, we can place a virtual copy of Lisanne's camera into the model, taking pictures at the exact same angles and locations, which results in accurate copies of the night pictures. Thanks to this work, we got a first glimpse of what the location must have looked like during daylight. But we can do more, for we can go back to the original night pictures and apply the camera pointing angles and camera movements to these images, creating a movie which accurately shows how the camera moved from one image to the next. So this is not CGI or AI, these are the original images, only with the calculated camera movements applied to them to show how they relate to each other. By adding correctly sized models into the simulation, we were able to recreate and check all arm movements required to make the various images, and this resulted in a prediction of the 2 young women sitting or standing very close behind each other in the narrow gap between the rocks and boulders visible in image 542 and 550. As we already suspected, our calculations confirmed that the images were made in series, with the camera position moving slightly between each series. The reason for this is not clear, but it is possible Kris and Lisanne took turns handling the camera, or they were trying to avoid blind spots by frequently moving the camera. Another item we noticed is that on moments when the rain seems to increase, the camera moves further to the back, where it would be more under the cover of the trees. As this area was not visible in any of the released images, we do not know what was behind Lisanne, in the darkness below the trees. But it is possible there was some sheltered hollow into which they retreated when the weather became too bad. During his latest expedition in June 2025, Roman discovered a shelter under a large stone near the shore of Rio Mamé, and it seems likely similar places exist as well in other locations. All we can say for sure, though, is that we see the camera retreating to the back as soon as the rain gets worse. Here we also hit the limitations of the 3D model, as the model can only make accurate predictions at places which have been covered by the night pictures, and there is a large area behind the 2 young women which cannot be seen in the available images. Similarly, we do not know for sure how deep the trench is between the boulder from image 550 and the rock wall from image 542, and whether Kris and Lisanne are standing or sitting. In Series A, the camera sways back and forth on the outstretched arm of Lisanne, But in all further series, the camera remains rock steady, apparently resting on the boulder and only turning back and forth slightly without any movements, which allows us to make compositions of images within this series. We tried to find any logic behind these series, but there does not seem to be any. Sometimes a series contains more than 20 images, and at other time only 6 or 7, while there is just as much variation within the time. The only rule which seems to persist is that the camera retreats to the back when the rain gets worse. Series C is made with the camera almost straight above the red flags which we see in image 550, and this solves the inconsistency in the original composite panorama. As the original composite assumed all pictures were taken from the same position, it gave the impression that the boulder in image 550 and the boulder in image 576 were two separate rocks, while the 3D model makes it very clear that we see two different views of the same boulder, taken from different locations. Similarly, the rock we see protruding on the lower edge of image 594 and the notch in the boulder on the edge of image 576 are the same. Once again, they do not fit in the composite because these images belong to different series and were made from different positions. Finally, if we look at the original panorama composite, the small boulder we see in image 599 and the boulder we see in the background of 550 are once again the same. As both images were taken from different positions, the parallax is causing the panorama to display them in two different positions and slightly different size. So time and time again, what we see is that we can perfectly stack images together which are made within the same series, but we get parallax problems as soon as we try to match images which were taken in two different series. Now, we should note that these are camera positions and not necessarily the position of the person taking the pictures, as several times the camera was held in an outstretched arm. The boulder with the SOS sign has a diameter of around 2.5 meters, making it likely the person taking the pictures never actually sat on top of this boulder, but instead only rested her arm with the camera on the stone. For Series D, the camera returns to almost the same position as it was in image 511, just before the start of Series A, but something has changed, or perhaps Lisanne has grown tired and does not have the strength left to lift up her arm again. What we saw in Series A is a very deliberate camera movement, where great care is taken to avoid anything blocking the light of the camera. Carefully avoiding Kris, Lisanne takes the camera in her left hand and image 541 is taken over the left shoulder of Kris, causing her chin and cheek to become visible. After this, when the rock in 542 blocks the light, the camera is lifted high up in order to get maximum visibility. Moving the camera over the head of Kris, she then takes the camera over in her right hand again in image 547, before lowering it down to the boulder next to her while taking image 550. Although she follows roughly the same pattern in Series D, the important difference is that in this series, Lisanne does not take over the camera in her left hand, and she does not lift the camera high up in the air. The effect of this is that instead of carefully avoiding Kris, as she did with image 541, the head of Kris appears prominently in image 580. So, in Series D, the camera is back in the 511 position, but instead of moving, it stays steady in this position, only turning to the left, then pitching up and back to the right again, describing a slow circle without bothering much about anything blocking the light. Image 580 fits perfectly within this pattern, making it far less likely that this particular image was taken with any specific purpose. Lisanne simply turned the camera in a slow, clockwise circle, and within this movement, the head of Kris happened to come within view. And because the camera stayed at the same position, only turning slowly, the automatic focus had sufficient time to get this picture in perfect focus, unlike 541, where the camera was moving and not centered. So, although there will always be people who see eyes, teeth, or cannibals in this picture, the truth is that image 580 was simply the result of Kris standing in front of Lisanne, with the latter not having the energy left to carefully avoid getting Kris into view, as she did during Series A. Because almost all images of this series have been released, we can accurately reproduce all camera movements, showing the camera remaining in the same position while turning in a slow, clockwise circle. It is important to note that each time the camera passes over the head of Kris, we get reflected light into the lens. This is exactly the same as what we noticed in image 547. Now, it is very important to note what is happening here. Because the flashlight has a much wider beam than the camera lens itself, the flash will reflect light from Kris her head back into the lens each time the camera is pointed into a direction which is close to that of Kris, even if Kris herself is not actually in view of the camera lens. We see this happening in image 547 when the camera is moving over the head of Kris and pointed slightly down. Then we see exactly the same happening in image 585. The camera moves over the head of Kris and we get reflected light back into the lens. Finally, we get this same effect a third time in image 591. The camera moves over the head of Kris and stray light reflects back into the lens. Once more, what we see in these images is not the head of Kris. She remains out of view of the lens, but because the flashlight covers a much wider beam, there is stray light from her head striking the camera, and we see this happening each time the camera is pointed close to the direction of Kris. For years and years, there has been a fierce debate about where was Kris, and even on whether or not she was still alive, with some inventing the most gruesome scenarios. Simply stating she must have been very close in front of Lisanne, as this fits with the camera movements, is not enough. But the fact that we can now prove that you get stray light reflected back into the camera each time the camera moves close to the head of Kris greatly strengthens the opinion that she was truly there. It all fits together perfectly. We can even pinpoint the exact position of Kris further if we draw a line back from the reflected light through the centre of the lens, showing Kris was in front and slightly to the left of Lisanne, with the forked tree to her right. And once again, this fits perfectly with image 580, which was indeed taken from a position slightly to the right. Now, some might argue that the fact that Kris was sitting or standing upright in front of Lisanne is already sufficient proof that she was alive when the night pictures were taken, but we can go one step further. For Series B, consisting of image 552 to 570, was taken from a position which is far forward compared to all other series. And this perfectly matches with the position where our calculations show Kris must have been. So either Kris moved away somewhere to allow Lisanne to take this series, or Kris was the one who took the pictures of Series B. In both cases, Kris must have been alive. As time passes by, the frequency of the flashlight pictures slows down. At moonset, when the series starts, Lisanne takes 32 pictures in just 9 minutes. But half an hour later, during the final series, 15 pictures are taken in just over 2 hours, with almost a full hour between the last 2 pictures. The long delay between the last 2 pictures might be due to the rain, which gets real bad at times. And this is also probably the reason why this series is taken from a position quite far back, where they presumably had better shelter. Deducing exact camera movements for the final series makes far less sense, due to the very large intervals between the pictures, as well as the fact that not all of these images were published. But it seems to be clear that the camera barely moves, staying in a fixed position while only rotating slightly. Kris is nowhere to be seen in this final series, while it can be argued that she should have been in view in either image 594 or 595, but there is nothing that indicates the presence of Kris. Unless one of the as-yet unreleased images shows otherwise, it seems likely that Kris moved away from her original position in order to seek shelter from the rain, explaining why she is not visible in the final series. Although the model usually shows both young women sitting in the narrow gap between the SOS boulder and the rock wall, there are a lot of valid arguments that they may have been standing. As we have seen in the past analysis, both young women moved about quite a lot in a relative short period of time, and this is a lot easier to explain if they were standing instead of sitting. However, this does not fundamentally change the picture, apart from the fact that the rock wall and the SOS boulder must have been higher than usually depicted. Image 542, with the camera presumably around eye height, shows we are still a considerable distance below the top of this wall and looking up at it. So, if Lisanne was standing, this wall was probably at least 2 meters high. Now, if we presume this is the shoreline of some river or stream, then in their weakened state, a wall of 2 or more meters high would probably be an impassable barrier, placing them in a precarious situation once the rain causes the water levels to rise. So, if they were standing close behind each other instead of sitting, the 3D model does not change, but the ground below the model, which we cannot see, becomes deeper, and the whole place becomes a far darker place with much higher shores. As Romaine's drone footage shows us, there are definitely places such as this in the northeasterly regions, near the area where Rio Culebra and Rio Mamey meet. So, as we already mentioned in a previous video, this area will be high on our list for the next expedition. But even if we might never be able to prove with absolute certainty which location was the true night location, our work on the night pictures already clearly shows the position Kris and Lisanne were in and what they had to endure in that cold, dark night in April 2014. Deep canyons such as this might look okay on a sunny day, but they become horribly dangerous traps once the rain starts and the water level quickly rises. And if this happens late at night, in total darkness, the situation quickly becomes hopeless. Never enter a place such as this without taking lots of precautions, including emergency beacons, backup communication devices, and climbing gear. Above all, never go without local guides, and make sure others know your exact plan and when you expect to return. Perhaps Kris and Lisanne were following a river such as this, hoping it would take them to the nearest village. Or perhaps they simply walked downhill and got into trouble when they tried to climb down the steep embankment in order to reach the water. We might never know, but it seems very likely the night location is somewhere in this area. Kris and Lisanne weren't taking pictures. What they were doing was using the camera flash as a signal light, and it is likely they never bothered about the fact that this resulted in pictures. They hoped that someone would see their light. That is why they aimed the camera at the open sky and not at each other. The pictures in themselves have no meaning, although it is thanks to these pictures that we might be able to find the night location and the route they took to get there. As we have seen, Lisanne was carefully aiming for the open sky, avoiding anything which might block her light. But it is unlikely she was aiming for one specific point, instead making clockwise circles with the camera to cover the largest area. If they had seen a plane or a flare or anything, we would have seen all pictures being aimed at the same spot. But that is not the case. She is clearly trying to reach a wide area of open sky. The fact that they waited for moonset before starting their signals shows they had planned this well in advance, and they went ahead with their plan even though the weather gradually became worse as the rain increased. It was a hopeless situation, and they were running out of options. Lost and alone, deep in the jungle. In the end, that is what the night pictures come down to. There are no deep, hidden meanings behind these pictures. No secret messages, no foul play, no aliens, and no cannibals. Perhaps one day we will find the night location to plant some tulips at the spot, as we originally planned to do, in honour of Kris and Lisanne. But even if we might never be able to convince everyone, this remains a story which should be told.